She saved a $40 million deal in 40 seconds. Then she went back to her corner, picked up her notepad, and said nothing. Nobody thanked her. Nobody looked at her. Nobody offered her water. They never did. For 5 years, the most powerful criminal organization in Seoul spoke freely in front of Adaeze Okafor-Kim because they believed she was furniture. She sat in their boardrooms. She translated their secrets. She flew on their private jets. She sat in rooms where decisions were made that governments would have paid millions to know about. And she said nothing. She listened. Because here is what none of those men ever stopped to consider. Not once in 5 years, in hundreds of rooms, across 15 countries and 3 continents. What does the furniture do after you leave? Adaeze Okafor-Kim was 28 years old, Nigerian-American, fluent in 11 languages, the daughter of a Nigerian diplomat and a Korean-American concert pianist, a Columbia-trained linguist with a Ph.D. She put on hold to take a job as an interpreter for a Mafia organization worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They thought she needed the work. She did not need the work. She needed the access. And in 5 years of being invisible in every room that mattered, in 5 years of being a phone that nobody worries about, in 5 years of being a wall that nobody watches, she built something. Quietly, legally, completely alone. Real estate holdings in 3 countries. An art fund that nobody knew existed. An 18% equity stake in a technology platform that just received a $230 million acquisition offer. $500 million. Built in the margins of a job nobody respects, in the hours nobody tracks, using intelligence that nobody thought to protect because nobody thought to ask what the interpreter was thinking. When they finally decided she knew too much, and they did decide that, which is the part of the story that changes everything, she was already gone. Not physically. She still showed up. She still opened her notepad. She still translated their Russian and their Japanese and their Mandarin with the same precision she brought to month 1. But everything she needed from them was already finished, already documented, already moved, already clean. The exit plan was done before they even started looking for a reason to use one. This is the story of how a woman who was treated like furniture became the architect of everything. This is a story of 5 years of silence that was never empty. This is a story of what happens when the most dangerous person in every room is also the one nobody sees. This is part 1. Pay attention to everything. She did. The Russian delegate's hand was already on the door handle, not reaching for it, already on it. His palm flat against the steel, his body angled toward the exit, his eyes telling everyone in the room what his mouth had not yet said, that the deal was dead, that the meeting was over, that $40 million was walking out of this building in the next 10 seconds. Chairman Shin Ji-won sat at the head of the glass table with the particular stillness of a man who was furious and could not show it. His 2 lead translators were both talking at the same time now, layering explanations over each other, and every word they added made the Russian delegate's expression colder. When 2 people explain the same mistake simultaneously, it does not sound like correction. It sounds like a cover-up. The room had the quality of air before lightning. 11 men, 3 languages, 1 catastrophic misreading of a single phrase, and no other skill to fix it. Then a voice came from the corner. Not loud, not urgent. The way a door opens when someone knows exactly which way it swings. Adaeze Okafor-Kim had been sitting slightly behind Chairman Shin for the past 3 hours with a notepad and an expression that gave nothing away. Nobody had looked at her directly once during the meeting. Nobody had offered her water. She was the interpreter. She was infrastructure. She was the phone, and you don't look at the phone when you're talking, but the phone was speaking now. She spoke in Russian, not textbook Russian, not classroom Russian, but the Russian of Moscow's business districts, with the rhythm and intonation of someone who had absorbed it from actual rooms rather than recordings. 40 seconds. Measured. She was not apologizing for the mistranslation. She was reframing the entire exchange, rebuilding the context around the offending phrase, so smoothly that the phrase itself seemed to dissolve. The Russian delegate's hand came off the door handle. He turned slowly. His expression moved through irritation, then something closer to recalibration, then, and this was the thing, this was the moment, curiosity. He said something back. Ada responded. The head of the Russian delegation, a man who had said nothing for the last 20 minutes, suddenly laughed. Not politely, actually laughed. He walked back to the table. He sat down. The deal did not collapse. The meeting closed 40 minutes later with agreements and handshakes. The Russian delegate gripped Chairman Shin's shoulder on his way out. The two lead translators exhaled like men who had been holding their breath underwater and finally surfaced. They shook each other's hands. Not one of them looked at Ada. She closed her notepad. She stood. She walked down the corridor to her small office off the executive floor, opened her encrypted laptop, updated 3 spreadsheets, made herself a cup of tea, and went to sleep. This was month 1. She had 59 more to go. Her full name was Adaeze Okafor-Kim, and she was 28 years old, and she was fluent in 11 languages, though she typically told people 7, because 11 made them ask too many questions, and Ada did not answer unnecessary questions. Her father was Dr. Chukwemeka Okafor, a Nigerian diplomatic attaché. Her mother was Kim Okafor, a Korean-American concert pianist. She grew up in embassy housing across 4 continents before most children have visited 2. By the time she was 10, she spoke 4 languages. By 16, 6. By 22, 9. The remaining 2 came later, for specific reasons, which will become clear. She held a double degree from Columbia in linguistics and international relations. She was a PhD candidate whose enrollment was currently on hold. She was, at this exact moment, worth approximately nothing that anyone inside the Shin building would recognize as wealth. That was the point. Her father had 2 rules. The first, before you speak in any room, understand every person in it. Language is not communication. Language is intelligence. The second rule he never spoke aloud. He demonstrated it. He was the kind of man who could sit in a meeting with 6 people and leave knowing each person's real position, real anxiety, real leverage, while they left knowing only what he permitted them to know. Ada learned to do this before she understood that most people couldn't. Her mother's rule was delivered differently. Kim Okafor walked into concert halls the way water enters a room. Quietly, completely, filling every space before anyone realized what was happening. She told Ada once, brushing her hair in a Geneva apartment with the rain blurring the city outside, "The woman who appears small takes up more space than anyone realizes." They never see her coming. Then she set down the brush, kissed Ada on the forehead, and went to bed. Ada was 17, the first time she used both rules in the same moment. A trade dinner between Nigerian and South Korean officials. Her father was managing an agreement that had taken weeks to nearly finalize. One of the interpreters rendered a culturally loaded phrase with technical accuracy and zero contextual awareness. The kind of translation that is correct and completely wrong at the same time. The South Korean delegation's lead negotiator went very still. The dinner table shifted in a way that means something beneath the surface has cracked. Ada excused herself to refill her water glass. On the way back, she stopped beside the interpreter and asked him a quiet question, or appeared to ask him a question, and in the course of the exchange corrected the phrase in both languages so naturally that no one could have said afterward exactly when the correction happened. The South Korean negotiator's shoulders dropped half an inch. The dinner continued. The agreement held. Her father saw all of it. Across the table, he reached over and squeezed her hand once. That was the entire reward. It was enough. 5 years after that dinner, both her parents were dead. A rain-wet highway outside Geneva, a curve taken wrong. 48 hours before the confirmation she already knew was coming. Ada was a junior at Columbia. She finished her degree on scholarship in grief and the kind of stubbornness that does not have a word because it is older than words. Grief made her quieter. Quieter made her more dangerous. The PhD program at 23. Brilliant work, genuinely. Also broke. Also aware that academia moved on its own schedule, which had no relationship to the schedule forming in her head. The placement listing appeared when she was 24. Discreet, through a firm that only worked with positions that never appeared on public job boards. Senior language consultant. Korean, Mandarin, Japanese, Russian. Discretion mandatory. Compensation exceptional. Ada applied. 40 candidates. She was selected after one interview. The interviewer was Director Choi, a man in his mid-50s with a face that revealed nothing and a suit that cost more than Ada's monthly rent, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to men who have spent careers making other people uncomfortable on purpose. He ran the interview in Korean. Ada matched him register for register, and somewhere in the second half she heard something, a slight inflection beneath the polished standard Korean, a North Hamgyong quality, the accent of a specific northeastern province that Choi had clearly spent decades erasing. She caught it in the third sentence. She said nothing about it. She simply adjusted her own Korean, almost unconsciously, almost imperceptibly, to a register that would carry a distant, faint familiarity for someone who had grown up hearing those sounds. She was not mimicking him. She was recognizing him. There's a profound difference between the two, and it is the difference between manipulation and fluency. Director Choi recommended her before she reached the elevator. Ada called her cousin Emika in Atlanta that evening. Emika was the closest thing she had to family now. Her father's sister's son. Good-natured, practical, occasionally the voice of reason she needed to hear and then disregard. She told him the job was temporary. She was not lying exactly. She intended to be there for a specific, bounded period of time. She intended to use every hour of it. Shin International Imports. Seoul headquarters. The kind of building that communicates power before a word is spoken. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, the specific architecture of a place that wants you to know immediately where you stand. Ada was given a small office off the executive floor, a security badge, and a salary that made her PhD stipend look like a rounding error. She bought 2 good blazers and a quality notebook, and she began. The first thing she noticed, nobody looked at her directly in meetings. The second thing, which was more important, they spoke freely in front of her. Not carelessly. These were not careless men. But translators are infrastructure. You do not worry about what your phone hears. You do not concern yourself with what your walls absorb. Ada was the phone. Ada was the walls. She filed this observation and moved on. Now, the family. Chairman Shin Jae-won was 62 and carried the posture of a man who made a decision years ago that he cannot reverse and has been shouldering the consequence ever since. He built the legitimate side of the business himself. Shin International Imports was a real company with real revenue and real staff who had no idea what else the organization was. The chairman wanted out of the other side. He did not know how to leave without losing his son's respect, so he stayed. He showed Ada occasional small courtesies, a nod after a difficult session, a genuine thank you, a rare acknowledgement. He was not a good man, in any simple sense. He was a complicated man who was quietly, privately, trying to become better. That is harder than it sounds and less heroic. Shin Hyun-woo was 34 and ran daily operations with the focused intensity of someone who trusts no one and verifies everything. He was not cruel recreationally. He was ruthless because he had decided somewhere in his 20s that efficiency required it, and he had never gone back to examine that decision. He did not like depending on people. He particularly disliked that he depended completely on Ada for every multilingual negotiation, every international meeting, every room where 2 or more languages operated simultaneously, which was most of the rooms that mattered. The dependency sat in him like a splinter. Discomfort in Hyun-woo curdled into resentment. Resentment, given enough time and the right conditions, grows edges. Shin Min-jae was 29 and a more complicated problem. Second son. International acquisitions. He spoke 4 languages imprecisely in Korean with the ease of someone who had never had to think about it. He relied on Ada professionally in ways that occasionally produced something approaching humility in him, which was unusual for anyone in this family. He treated her like a person sometimes. Not always, not consistently, but sometimes, and in this organization that made him worth tracking. Ada tracked everything. Director Choi was a fixer, loyal to money, the carrier of decisions that nobody wanted to phrase out loud. Ada had cataloged his tells in the first 30 days. Jaw tension when an answer disappointed him, a pen tap when deciding whether to push harder, a shoulder shift when moving to a new angle of questioning, a fractional pause before questions he had written in advance. 4 tells. Filed. Retrieved as needed. Month 3 was when everything changed, though no one else in the building knew it. A late-night working dinner. Chairman Shin and a contact from the Seoul Municipal Development Office. The kind of dinner that happens in private rooms precisely because nothing that is said there is meant to travel. Ada translated the relevant portions faithfully. She filed the rest. What she filed, a mention of a Mapo district rezoning that had not yet been publicly announced. Legal information, overheard legally, in the course of legitimate professional work. That night, she called Emeka. Past midnight in Seoul, midday in Atlanta. I need you to buy a building, she said. She heard him set something down. I'm sorry, say that again. A building, commercial property. Mapo District, Seoul. I'll send you the address in the morning. Use the account I set up. Ada. A pause. She recognized the tone. This was not the casual cousin voice. This was the voice he used when he thought she was about to do something she could not undo. That account. That's every single cent you have. I know what's in the account. That's your emergency fund. That's the money you lived on rice and beans for 2 years at Columbia to build. 6 nights a week, she said. Sometimes 7. I know. I was the one eating it. Silence. She could hear him thinking. She waited. Her father had taught her that silence applied with patience was its own form of argument. Emeka always broke first. Ada, what if you're wrong? One beat. I'm not wrong. But what if... Emeka. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. I was in the room. I heard this before the people making the decision. Put it in any document. By the time it's public, the price will have already moved. I am not wrong. By the building. A long exhale on his end. If this goes badly, I'm going to need you to know that I told you so very thoroughly. Noted. By the building. He did. He complained about it continuously for the following 4 years. To Ada, to his wife, to colleagues, to anyone who would listen. He was not wrong to comply. The property went into her grandmother's name through a Korean management firm. Every step documented. Every transfer clean. Every filing correct. Ada slept 4 hours. Went back to work. Nobody in the building noticed a single change in her. She was furniture. Furniture does not make midnight investment decisions. Furniture does not have a grandmother whose name is now attached to an asset that will triple in value within 18 months. The first brick of the empire was laid. Month 4 of the loyalty test. She would have smiled about it if smiling at work were something she did. Hyun-woo planted a false cargo figure in a casual conversation. Deliberately wrong. Designed to trace if she was passing information anywhere she shouldn't be. She translated it faithfully as given. 2 days later, she found the real figure in a shipping document and flagged it to Chairman Shin's assistant as a likely clerical error that should be corrected before it created downstream problems. Hyun-woo watched the false information. It went nowhere suspicious. He marked her reliable. He believed he had tested her. He had no idea she identified the test in the 3rd sentence of that casual conversation, filed it immediately, and spent the next 48 hours determining the exact calibration of response that would satisfy him without revealing that she'd seen him coming. She learned more from that exchange than he did. She always learned more. Month 5 was Mrs. Song. The organization's bookkeeper was 67 years old and had worked for Chairman Shin for 28 years and spoke only Korean and observed everything. Ada had noticed her in doorways and at the edges of rooms. The particular quality of her attention, that specific watchfulness that belongs to women who have survived powerful men for decades by understanding them precisely and speaking only when necessary. One morning, Mrs. Song came to Ada's office, placed a cup of barley tea on the desk, said nothing, and left. Ada drank it. She understood immediately. This was not a courtesy. It was acknowledgement, one careful watcher recognizing another. From that day, Ada returned it. Genuine attention, the names of Mrs. Song's 3 grandchildren memorized without effort, a morning greeting that was never rushed, the occasional question about the eldest granddaughter studying nursing in Busan. Not strategy, actual respect. The 2 things that look most like each other and are least often confused by the people who practice them. They were more alike than anyone in the building knew, including, for a while, each other. Month 6. Min Jae came back from Tokyo and within the week asked Ada to manage a private call with Japanese art broker. The broker used an Osaka inflection with specific cultural layering that standard translation missed entirely. Ada handled it without breaking rhythm. After the call, Min Jae was gathering his papers and said something in Japanese, quiet, almost to himself, the way people say things when they're processing rather than communicating. You translated what I meant, not just what I said. Ada responded without looking up. In Japanese, that's the job. He looked at her after that with something that wasn't quite what it had been before. Not romance. That word is too small and too specific. Recognition. The look of someone who has been in a room for 6 months and just realized there's a window. She filed it carefully. Recognition in this building was neither asset nor liability until you knew what the other person intended to do with it. Year 2. The art auction in Tokyo, a private sale that appeared on no public calendar. The Shin organization was moving funds through high-value acquisitions. Ada was there to facilitate communication with the auction house. During a preview session, she noticed a piece the Shin team dismissed without discussion, a minor Basquiat, passed over because it lacked the specific provenance the organization needed for their purposes. The broker mentioned it in passing. Under $1 million. Private buyer. No press. Ada excused herself to the corridor. Her Luxembourg attorney had been on retainer since month 8 for moments exactly like this one. The purchase executed through her art investment entity in 4 minutes. $820,000. Clean, legal, traceable only to a Luxembourg company that held her art holdings at distance from any standard background search. She returned to the preview. Nobody had noticed she stepped away. Nobody ever noticed. 3 years later, that piece sold for $12 million. The Bridge AI conversation happened that same year. Late at night, Ada alone in her apartment with the lights off and only the laptop screen in the dark. Yemi Adeyemi and Park Soo-jin, Columbia classmates, were building a linguistic AI platform, not translation software in the conventional sense, something that preserved cultural register, tonal weight, the subtext that ordinary translation tools destroyed entirely. They needed her. They could not afford her. She did not need their money. Walk me through the architecture. Ada said on the first call. Yemi talked for 20 minutes. When he finished, she was quiet. Your core architecture is backwards, she said. The concept is correct, but you're building register and subtext as add-on layers. They are not layers. They are the foundation. Build it the way you're building it, and it will keep failing under real conditions because you got the weight distribution wrong. Silence. Then Soo-jin said quietly, She's right. Yemi, I know she's right. Ada, we can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. I want equity. 18%. My name stays buried. Minor consultant in the supplementary filings. Nothing more. I work nights and weekends. Nobody outside this call knows I'm involved. Ada. Yemi's voice had the particular frustration of someone who understands they're about to agree to something that helps someone else more than it helps them. You're taking all the risk. I know what I'm taking, she said. Do we have a deal? Soo-jin laughed first. She already ran the numbers, she told Yemi. She knows exactly what this is worth in 4 years. I ran them in the first 8 minutes, Ada said. They had a deal. Ada worked nights for 6 months, pouring her understanding of language, not as data and not as code, but as a living thing with history and weight and consequence, into platform's core. She went to sleep each night with the same expression she brought to every workday. She allowed herself one smile in the dark before the lights went out. Bridge AI launched in beta. Nobody at Shin International knew. Nobody asked what their interpreter did after 6 in the evening. She was furniture. Furniture doesn't have a life outside the room. The Zurich trip, end of year 2. The most legally sensitive assignment she had handled. 3 days of European banking meetings. She translated with absolute precision, filtered nothing, documented everything afterward. On the return flight, Chairman Shin sat across from her in the private cabin. Unusual, as he typically sat with his associates. He was quiet for some time. Then, my father's interpreter stayed with him 30 years. He attended the funeral. He looked at the window, at the clouds below. Loyalty is a vanishing art. Ada said nothing. She could not determine whether this was philosophy, test, or something else. A man using her presence as a surface to think against, telling himself something under the guise of telling her. She filed it. She had learned that everything Chairman Shin said deliberately was worth keeping. She did not know yet that he already knew considerably more about her than she had accounted for. That conversation would come in year 5. For now, she let the silence between them sit undisturbed and translated nothing. Year 3, the conversation with Min-jae that neither of them scheduled, both working late. He appeared at the doorway of the conference room with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of someone who wasn't sure the gesture was appropriate. She indicated the chair across from her. He sat. They talked for 45 minutes. Genuinely talked, not the professional exchange of information that passed for conversation in this building. About language. About what it actually feels like to shift between Korean and English, not just linguistically, but personally. The way a person becomes slightly different in each one. About the specific exhaustion of code switching in every dimension simultaneously. Adjusting not just your vocabulary, but your posture, your eye contact, your laugh, the amount of space you take up. About belonging incompletely to 2 cultures and finding yourself most at home in the space between them, which is also the loneliest space. Ada knew this particular loneliness from the inside. She did not say so, but something recalibrated in how she saw him. He was no longer an organizational factor. He was a person. Persons require different kinds of attention than factors. She adjusted. She also made a note. He was not his brother. He had not yet decided who he was going to be. That made him less readable than Hyunwoo and considerably more interesting. Moscow came and clarified the line. The Russian contact requested Ada specifically. 3 years for negotiations. He trusted her precision the way people trust things that have never failed them. He did not know that Ada was by now fluent enough in the specific vocabulary of his work to understand not just what he said, but the distance between what he said and what he meant. On the flight home, she sat with her laptop open and did not type anything for a long time. She was not a criminal. She had not once facilitated harm. She translated words. The decisions that followed those words lived with the men who made them. She was certain of this distinction. She had drawn that line in month 1, and she had not moved it by a single degree. Not for money, not for safety, not for any strategic advantage. The line was the thing she was not willing to trade. She closed the laptop. She looked at the dark outside the window and thought about her father, who had told her that language without ethics is simply a better calibrated weapon. She had understood it at 17. She understood it now more. The grandmother passed at the end of year 3. 94 years old, lay ghost peacefully. Ada flew home for 1 week. She slept actual hours. She ate jollof rice and let people fuss over her, and sat at the grave and spoke in Yoruba for a long time without translating for anyone. She inherited the estate, including the Seoul properties registered in her grandmother's name. She moved them into a trust. Everything clean, everything documented, everything hers now in the most direct sense. She came back to Seoul quieter than before. Nobody noticed. She was always quiet. That is the thing about furniture. Nobody tracks its grief. Year 4. Director Choi finally started digging. Her counter-surveillance, built across 4 years of methodical observation, a quiet network of indicators she had assembled by watching the organization's internal security patterns, flagged the inquiry within 2 days. Choi was pulling her background, her finances, her personal connections. She knew exactly what he would find. A clean record, modest visible accounts, a pause PhD, a modest apartment, a modest life. Nothing alarming. He would not find the Luxembourg entity. He would not find the Bridge AI equity. He would not find the trust. She had built the invisibility too precisely. She had been building it since month 3 for exactly this possibility. But the inquiry meant Hyunwoo had moved from suspicion to directed action. The clock had started. She updated her timeline. She did not panic. Panic belongs to people who haven't been preparing for 4 years. Walking back from a working lunch with Min-jae, security at a distance behind them, he asked, out of nowhere, with the directness of someone who had decided to say it before he could change his mind, "Are you happy here?" She stopped entirely for one full second. Not because the question was out of place. Because it was real. Nobody in this building had asked her that. "I'm doing what I came here to do," she said. He looked at her from the side. "That's not what I asked." "I know." She didn't answer. He didn't push. That evening alone, she thought about it seriously for the first time. Happy. Was she happy? She was building something real, in the dark. She was safe because nobody could see her precisely enough to threaten her. She had made a particular peace with invisibility. Functional, productive, sustainable. Whether any of that was the same thing as happiness, she genuinely could not determine. She filed a question. Unanswered files bothered her. She went back to her spreadsheets. Bridge AI won the U.S. State Department contract. $45 million over 3 years. Multilingual diplomatic translation. The contract she had told Yemi to hold out for. The one that made everything else inevitable. The Singapore acquisition offer arrived inside 60 days. $230 million. All cash. Yemi called immediately, his voice a frequency she had not heard from him before. "Ada, are you seeing this number?" "I'm seeing it. We should move." 30 days, she said. "Ada." "Yemi, have I been wrong yet?" A pause. "No, 30 days. She ended the call. Called her Luxembourg attorney. Called Emeka. Called Yemi back. Said the same thing to each of them in 3 different registers of voice that carried the same meaning. It's time. She did not celebrate. She moved. The end game was already in motion. But the final boardroom, the dead man switch, the envelope, the moment Ada would sit across from the men who had decided she knew too much and quietly explain that they had misjudged the situation entirely. That is part 2. What you need to understand before part 2 begins is this. Adaeze Okafor-Kim spent 2 years being furniture in a building full of powerful men. She was invisible by design, by discipline, by the practice of an entire childhood spent in rooms where the smartest person was never the loudest one. She watched, she listened, she translated, she filed, and in the dark, in the margins, in the hours nobody thought to count for, she built. She overheard a dinner conversation and turned it into a property investment that tripled. She stepped away from an art auction for 12 minutes and quietly purchased a piece that nobody else wanted for $820,000. She spent 6 months rebuilding the architecture of a platform that would sell for $230 million, with her name buried in a footnote. She did all of it while translating the deals of men who never once asked her name outside of a meeting room. She did all of it without a partner, a mentor, or anyone who held a complete picture. Just Ada, her encrypted laptop, her 3 spreadsheets, and her father's voice telling her that language is intelligence, and her mother's voice quieter beneath it. They never see her coming. They decided she knew too much. She was already worth $500 million. They had absolutely no idea. Part 2 is where they find out what they missed. What they overlooked in every meeting, every hallway, every room where they spoke freely in front of furniture. And if you felt something during this story, if any part of you was sitting up a little straighter by the end of it, then you already understand what this channel is about. Hit subscribe right now because part 2 of The Interpreter is coming, and the boardroom scene alone is worth everything. Like this video. Drop a comment. Tell us the moment Ada got you. The loyalty test. The midnight call to Emeka. The barley tea. The art auction. Whatever it was, say it below. Part 2 drops next and the education is over. What comes next is the reckoning.